You think Christmas desserts were always store-bought pies and boxed cake mixes? Think again. American kitchens once produced holiday sweets so inventive and deeply meaningful they could make modern bakers weep with envy. Let's dig into 30 lost Christmas desserts America completely forgot. Fruitcake with Suet was once the undisputed king of Christmas desserts, baked weeks in advance and aged like fine wine in American pantries. The recipe called for beef sweet, hard fat from around the kidneys, which gave the cake an incomparably moist texture that butter could not replicate. Dried fruits were soaked in brandy for days before being folded into dense batter heavy with molasses and spices. The cakes were wrapped in cheesecloth soaked in spirits and stored in cool cellars, developing deeper flavor each week. Families served thin slices alongside coffee after Christmas dinner, the richness demanding moderation. The Suet kept the cake fresh for months, practical for households without reliable refrigeration. Children wrinkled their noses at the dense texture, but adults understood this was celebration food meant to last. Today, fruitcake survives mostly as a punchline, but the Suet-laden original was magnificent. Mincemeat pie with actual meat carried centuries of English tradition into American holiday tables. The filling combined finely chopped beef or venison with suet, apples, raisins, currants, citrus peel, and a heavy pour of brandy or rum. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves transformed what sounds strange into something hauntingly delicious. The meat provided richness and body, while the fruit added sweetness and moisture. Families made mincemeat in enormous batches each November, jarring it for use throughout the holiday season. The alcohol preserved the mixture and mellowed the flavors over weeks of aging. Served warm with hard sauce or brandy butter, mincemeat pie was the centerpiece of Christmas Eve suppers across New England and the Mid-Atlantic. Children were given small portions, the boozy richness considered adult fare. Modern mincemeat abandoned the meat entirely, leaving behind only a pale imitation of the original. The authentic version was complex, savory sweet, and utterly unforgettable. Plum pudding arrived at Christmas tables wreathed in blue flames, brandy burning dramatically as families gathered to witness the spectacle. This dense, dark pudding contained no plums at all. The name referred to raisins, which were once called plums in England. The batter combined sweet, breadcrumbs, flour, dried fruits, nuts, and enough brandy to preserve it for months. Families steamed the pudding for hours in cloth-wrapped molds, then aged it like fruitcake for optimal flavor. On Christmas Day, the pudding was reheated, doused with warmed brandy, and set alight before being carried ceremoniously to the table. Hidden inside were silver coins or charms that promised luck to whoever found them in their slice. The tradition required advanced planning and genuine skill, making it impractical for modern rushed households. Plum pudding represented the pinnacle of Victorian Christmas celebration, a dessert that demanded reverence. Suet pudding with hard sauce was Christmas comfort food for families who valued richness over refinement. The pudding itself was simple: flour, suet, sugar, and spices steamed until dense and satisfying. What elevated it was the hard sauce, a mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until fluffy and pale. The cold sauce melted slowly over warm pudding, creating rivers of boozy sweetness that soaked into every bite. Families served this after heavy Christmas dinners when something substantial was needed to conclude the feast. The suet gave the pudding a texture impossible to achieve with butter, tender yet sturdy enough to hold together. Children received smaller portions with less sauce, the brandy content making it adult territory. Making hard sauce required patience and strong arms, the butter needing thorough beating to achieve proper consistency. This dessert disappeared as sweet became difficult to source and modern tastes shifted toward lighter fare. Snow pudding with custard sauce brought elegance to Victorian Christmas tables with its cloud-like texture and golden accompaniment. The pudding was made from gelatin, sugar, lemon juice, and stiffly beaten egg whites, creating something ethereal and trembling. It arrived at the table pure white and shimmering, often molded into decorative shapes that showcased the cook's skill. The custard sauce, rich with egg yolks and vanilla, provided warmth and richness against the cold, airy pudding. This combination of textures, soft, cold, light against warm, smooth, rich, made every spoonful a revelation. Families considered it sophisticated enough for company, yet simple enough for Christmas Eve supper. The dessert required careful timing, the gelatin needing to set properly before unmolding. Children adored the wobbling presentation, while adults appreciated the delicate balance of flavors. Snow pudding vanished as instant desserts replaced homemade gelatin creations, taking its quiet elegance with it. Boiled custard served warm in cups was Christmas Eve tradition in Southern households, a drinkable dessert that bridged the gap between eggnog and pudding. Rich with eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, the custard was cooked slowly over gentle heat until it thickened enough to coat a spoon. Families served it warm from heirloom cups, sometimes with a grating of nutmeg on top. The texture was silky and comforting, substantial enough to satisfy without the heaviness of solid desserts. Making boiled custard required patience and attention. Too much heat would scramble the eggs, ruining hours of work. Grandmothers passed down their techniques through demonstration, teaching daughters to recognize the exact moment the custard reached perfection. Some families added bourbon, transforming it into something approaching liquid luxury. The tradition faded as store-bought eggnog became convenient, and fewer cooks possessed the skill to execute proper custard. Boiled custard was more than dessert, it was ritual. Chess tarts for Christmas multiplied the beloved Southern chess pie into individual portions perfect for holiday gatherings. Each tart shell held the same buttery, custardy filling: eggs, sugar, butter, and a splash of vinegar that gave it distinctive tang. The tops cracked beautifully during baking, creating golden surfaces that shattered with each bite. Families baked dozens for Christmas parties, the small size allowing guests to sample without committing to full slices. The filling was simple but required precise technique to achieve the right texture, neither too runny nor too firm. Some cooks added lemon or chocolate, creating variations that filled platters with visual variety. Children could eat these without the mess of larger desserts, making them practical for holiday chaos. The tarts kept well, actually improving overnight as flavors melded. Chess tarts disappeared as store-bought cookies replaced homemade holiday treats, sacrificing craftsmanship for convenience. Charlotte Russe in molded glory was the showstopper dessert of Victorian Christmas celebrations. The elaborate creation featured ladyfingers lining a mold filled with Bavarian cream flavored with vanilla and often studded with candied fruit. Once chilled and unmolded, the Charlotte revealed perfect cylindrical beauty, the ladyfingers creating a delicate shell around the creamy interior. Families reserved this for Christmas dinner when company was present and impressions mattered. The preparation required planning and skill. The ladyfingers needed precise trimming, the cream needed perfect texture, and the unmolding demanded steady hands. Some versions added whipped cream rosettes or crystallized violets for additional elegance. The dessert melted slowly at room temperature, encouraging prompt service and appreciative consumption. Charlotte Russe required the kind of leisure and domestic skill that modern households rarely possess. Its disappearance marks the loss of an era when holiday desserts were genuine achievements. Nestle road pudding brought Russian elegance to American Christmas tables during the Gilded Age. This frozen dessert combined chestnut puree with candied fruits, maraschino cherries, and whipped cream, all enriched with egg custard and a generous pour of maraschino liqueur. The mixture was frozen in decorative molds, then unmolded to reveal elaborate shapes that gleamed on silver platters. Named for a Russian diplomat, the pudding represented cosmopolitan sophistication that wealthy families aspired to display. The chestnut flavor was unlike anything else on the holiday table, earthy and sweet in equal measure. Making it required sourcing chestnuts, candying fruits, and mastering the temperamental frozen custard technique. Families served thin slices, the richness demanding restraint. The pudding disappeared as its ingredients became exotic and its preparation too demanding for modern schedules. Nestle road pudding was Christmas elegance frozen into unforgettable form. Tipsy parson wobbled onto Christmas tables carrying centuries of English tradition and considerable amounts of sherry. This layered trifle began with sponge cake soaked in sweet sherry until thoroughly saturated, then spread with jam and topped with rich custard and whipped cream. The alcohol permeated everything, making each spoonful warming and slightly intoxicating. Families assembled the dessert in clear glass bowls to display the beautiful layers, each stratum visible and inviting. The name came from the notion that village parsons, known for their love of sherry, might become tipsy from such indulgence. Children received versions made with fruit juice instead, preserving their innocence, while adults enjoyed the spirituous original. Making Tipsy Parson required nothing more than patience and good ingredients, yet the result rivaled elaborate French desserts. The tradition faded as trifles simplified and alcohol content became controversial. Tipsy Parson deserved better than obscurity. Syllabub in stemmed glasses was Christmas elegance whipped into frothy perfection. This ancient English dessert combined cream, sugar, and wine or sherry, beaten until it formed soft peaks that held their shape in delicate glasses. The mixture separated slowly, the creamy foam floating above a pool of flavored liquid that guests sipped after finishing the top. Families served syllabub at the end of Christmas dinner, the light texture providing relief after heavy courses. Making it required vigorous whisking by hand, often delegated to daughters learning domestic arts. The wine needed careful selection. Too sweet and the dessert became cloying, too dry and it lacked charm. Some versions incorporated lemon juice for brightness, cutting through the richness with citrus tang. The dessert looked ethereal in crystal glasses, catching candlelight and trembling with each movement. Syllabub disappeared as electric mixers made whipped cream commonplace and the patience for hand whisking vanished. It was celebration in a glass. Blanc mange molded in copper forms graced Victorian Christmas tables with its pristine beauty. This milk pudding, thickened with cornstarch or Irish moss and flavored with almond extract, emerged from molds in elaborate shapes that showcased the cook's artistry. The texture was silky smooth, trembling gently when carried to the table on silver platters. Families served it with fruit sauces, raspberry, strawberry, or preserved cherries, that provided color contrast and flavor counterpoint. Making proper blanc mange required attention to temperature and timing, the mixture needing precise cooking to set without becoming rubbery. Some cooks added ground almonds for authenticity. Others relied on extract alone for convenience. Children loved its mild sweetness and wobbly presentation, while adults appreciated its refined simplicity. The copper molds themselves were prized possessions, passed through generations and displayed in kitchen hutches. Blanc mange faded as instant puddings promised convenience, sacrificing elegance for speed. Floating Island drifted onto Christmas tables as clouds of meringue atop golden custard seas. Soft meringue was poached in milk, then floated on chilled custard made rich with egg yolks and vanilla. The contrast was everything. Airy white islands against smooth yellow depths, sweet puffs dissolving into creamy base with each spoonful. Families served this in shallow bowls that displayed the visual drama to full effect. Making the meringue required gentle handling, the poaching demanding careful temperature control to prevent collapse. Some cooks drizzled caramel threads over the islands, adding golden webs that crackled against soft textures. The custard base needed proper cooking to achieve silkiness without curdling, a skill grandmothers demonstrated rather than explained. Children competed for the largest meringue portions while adults savored the custard's depth. Floating Island required multiple techniques executed perfectly. Its disappearance reflects the loss of patience that defined holiday cooking. Indian pudding steamed for hours brought colonial tradition to New England Christmas tables. This dense cornmeal pudding combined Native American ingredients with English technique, creating something uniquely American. Cornmeal was cooked slowly with milk, molasses, ginger, and cinnamon until it thickened into a mass that baked low and slow for hours. The result was dark, sticky, and intensely flavored, with edges that caramelized against the baking dish. Families served it warm with cold cream or vanilla ice cream, the temperature contrast heightening sensation. The molasses provided depth that sugar could never match, mineral and earthy alongside sweet. Making Indian pudding required time modern schedules rarely allow, the long baking transforming simple ingredients through patience. Children often found it too intense, its dark color and strong flavor challenging young palates. Indian pudding connected Christmas tables to America's earliest culinary traditions. Its rarity marks a severed connection to colonial heritage. Lady Baltimore cake towered over Southern Christmas tables in layers of white perfection filled with fruits and nuts. This elegant creation featured white cake layers filled with a mixture of raisins, figs, pecans, and sometimes candied cherries, all bound with fluffy white frosting. The cake originated in Charleston and spread throughout the South as the pinnacle of holiday baking. Each layer required careful handling, the delicate crumb demanding gentle assembly. The filling combined textures, chewy dried fruit, crunchy nuts, smooth frosting, into something complex and satisfying. Families reserved Lady Baltimore for Christmas Day dinner, when its impressive height could be properly appreciated. Making the frosting required cooking sugar syrup to precise temperature before beating it into egg whites until glossy. The cake improved overnight as flavors melded and moisture distributed evenly. Lady Baltimore represented the apex of Southern hospitality, a dessert that announced celebration through both beauty and taste. Divinity candy piled in crystal dishes was Christmas sweetness requiring perfect weather and steady hands. This Southern confection combined sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites into clouds of sweet nothings that melted on the tongue. The mixture was cooked to precise temperature, then beaten until it lost its gloss and held soft peaks that could be dropped onto waxed paper. Humidity was Divinity's enemy. Damp weather prevented proper setting, leaving sticky failures instead of perfect peaks. Families made Divinity only on dry winter days, watching weather reports with the same attention given to holiday guests. Pecans or candied cherries often studded each piece, adding texture and visual appeal to the snowy mounds. Children watched the beating process with fascination, the transformation from syrup to fluff seeming like kitchen magic. Divinity required confidence and experience, the window between success and failure narrow. Its difficulty made every successful batch a genuine achievement worth sharing. Stack cake for Christmas gatherings multiplied thin layers into towering monuments of Appalachian hospitality. Each layer was more cookie than cake, thin and sturdy enough to stack 6 or 8 high with dried apple filling between. The apple filling was cooked from dried fruit with brown sugar and spices until thick and spreadable. Families assembled stack cakes days before serving, allowing moisture from the filling to soften the layers into something almost pudding-like. The tradition held that wedding guests each brought a layer, but Christmas versions were made entirely at home. Each slice revealed the beautiful striations of dark filling and pale cake, a cross-section of patient effort. The flavor was deeply autumnal, apples, cinnamon, molasses, yet perfect for winter celebrations. Stack cakes kept for weeks, improving with time as flavors continued to meld. Making one required planning that began with drying apples months earlier. Stack cake was heritage baked into edible form. Scripture cake required bakers to search their Bibles before measuring ingredients. Each component was identified only by scriptural reference. Judges for honey, Leviticus for salt, Kings for spices, making the recipe both dessert and devotional exercise. The resulting cake was rich with fruit, nuts, and spices, similar to fruitcake but lighter in texture. Families made scripture cake as Christmas Eve tradition, children looking up verses while mothers measured. The exercise reinforced biblical literacy while creating something delicious, combining education and celebration. Each household had preferred translations, some verses yielding different ingredients depending on the Bible version. The cake itself was dense and aromatic, studded with figs, raisins, and almonds identified through verse hunting. Scripture cake represented an era when religious observance and daily life intertwined naturally. Its disappearance reflects the separation of sacred and secular that defines modern households. Coconut pyramid candy stacked in snowy peaks decorated Christmas candy dishes across America. These dense confections combined shredded coconut with sugar syrup, shaped into cone forms that resembled miniature mountains. The texture was chewy and intensely sweet, each pyramid requiring slow enjoyment rather than quick consumption. Families made them in large batches, the simple ingredients belying the skill needed for proper consistency. The syrup required cooking to exact temperature. Too cool, and the pyramids wouldn't hold shape. Too hot, and they became hard as rocks. Some dipped the bases in chocolate, adding richness that balanced the coconut sweetness. Children loved arranging them on platters, the peaked shapes inviting playful presentation. The candy kept well in tins, making it practical for gift-giving and extended holiday entertaining. Coconut pyramids disappeared as commercial candy bars replaced homemade confections. They were Christmas creativity shaped into edible architecture. Sponge cake with wine sauce carried Victorian elegance into American Christmas celebrations. The cake itself was light and tender, made airy through vigorous beating of eggs without chemical leaveners. The wine sauce, sherry or Madeira cooked with sugar and egg yolks, poured warm over each slice, soaking into the delicate crumb. Families served this at formal Christmas dinners when something refined was needed to conclude elaborate meals. Making proper sponge cake required technique that modern bakers rarely possess, the eggs needing beating by hand until tripled in volume. The wine sauce demanded attention to prevent curdling, the egg yolks requiring gentle cooking over simmering water. Together, cake and sauce created something greater than either alone, the alcohol's warmth enhancing the egg's richness. Children received versions with vanilla sauce, the wine reserved for adults who appreciated its sophistication. Sponge cake with wine sauce was Christmas refinement from an era that valued skill. Ribbon cake sliced to reveal stripes of color that made Christmas tables gasp with delight. This architectural marvel featured alternating layers of white, pink, and chocolate cake, each thin enough to create dramatic visual effect when cut. The layers were baked separately, then stacked with thin spreads of frosting that held everything together without overwhelming the delicate cake. Families reserved ribbon cake for Christmas Day dinner when its reveal would receive the appreciation such effort deserved. Making it required baking multiple batches, timing each layer to achieve identical thickness. The pink layer came from strawberry or raspberry flavoring, sometimes food coloring when fruit was unavailable. Children loved counting the stripes and claiming their favorite color. The cake demanded patience that hurried modern bakers rarely possess, each layer needing complete cooling before assembly. Ribbon cake disappeared as layer cakes simplified into two-layer convenience. It was Christmas artistry sliced into edible rainbows. Burnt sugar cake carried caramelized depth into holiday celebrations across the South. The distinctive flavor came from sugar cooked until dark amber, almost black, then carefully diluted with hot water to create syrup that flavored both cake and frosting. The resulting taste was complex, bitter, sweet, and deeply toasted in ways plain sugar could never achieve. Families passed down the precise moment to stop the burning, that instant before bitter crossed into acrid. The cake layers were tender and brown, frosted with caramel icing made from the same burnt sugar base. Making proper burnt sugar required courage, the smoking pan seeming dangerous to nervous cooks. Children watched with wide eyes as grandmothers stood unflinching over billowing pans. The cake kept well, actually improving as moisture redistributed over days. Burnt sugar cake has nearly vanished, its technique too intimidating for modern kitchens. It was Christmas alchemy, transforming simple sugar into something profound. Orange wine cake soaked holiday tables in citrus-scented spirits during the Victorian era. The cake combined fresh orange juice and zest with sweet wine, creating flavor that was bright yet warming. The batter was rich with butter and eggs, the orange providing freshness against alcoholic depth. After baking, additional wine was brushed over the warm cake, soaking into the crumb until it became almost pudding-like at the edges. Families served thin slices, the intensity demanding moderation. The orange flavor cut through heavy Christmas dinners, providing palate refreshment that richer desserts could not match. Making it required good wine, not cooking wine since the alcohol's quality showed in every bite. Some versions added candied orange peel for texture and visual appeal. Children received versions made with orange juice alone, preserving the citrus brightness without the wine. Orange wine cake faded as holiday baking simplified. It was sunshine and spirits combined. Hickory nut cake showcased America's native harvest in Christmas desserts across Appalachia and the Midwest. These wild nuts, foraged in autumn and cracked by hand through long winter evenings, provided flavor that cultivated walnuts could not match. The taste was richer, more complex, with hints of maple and earth that spoke of forest floors and patient gathering. Families incorporated hickory nuts into butter cakes, their oil keeping the crumb moist for days. Children spent December evenings picking nut meats from shells. The tedious work transformed into family togetherness. The cakes were often frosted with brown sugar icing that complemented the nut's natural sweetness. Making hickory nut cake required access to wild trees and willingness to crack the notoriously hard shells. As families moved from rural areas and lost connection to foraging traditions, this cake became rare. Hickory nut cake was Christmas rooted in American soil. Jam cake dense with blackberry preserves was Christmas tradition in Southern kitchens. The cake used homemade jam stirred directly into spiced batter, creating something moist, dark, and intensely flavored. Blackberry jam was traditional, though some families used strawberry or apple butter depending on what summer had provided. The spices, cinnamon, cloves, allspice, married with fruit to create warmth perfect for winter celebrations. Families made jam cakes in tube pans, the shape allowing even baking of the dense batter. The cake needed no frosting, its moist crumb and deep flavor standing alone. Some added buttermilk for tang that balanced the jam's sweetness. Children loved the dark color and the visible fruit throughout each slice. Jam cake kept for weeks, improving as flavors continued to meld. The tradition faded as fewer families made summer preserves. Jam cake was seasons connected, summer's harvest transformed into winter celebration. Coconut snowball cakes rolled in white perfection covered Christmas platters in fluffy abundance. These small round cakes were baked in special molds or shaped by hand, then frosted and rolled in shredded coconut until they resembled snowballs ready for throwing. The cake inside was tender vanilla, the frosting sweet and sticky enough to hold the coconut coating. Families made dozens for holiday parties, the individual portions eliminating the need for slicing and serving. Children helped roll the cakes in coconut, their small hands perfect for the delicate work. The finished snowballs were arranged on platters where they resembled winter landscapes in miniature. Some added a cherry half on top for festive color against the white. Making them required patience and assembly line efficiency, the process often becoming family activity. Coconut snowball cakes disappeared as cupcakes became universal. They were winter wonderland made edible. Fig cake dark with dried fruit brought Mediterranean richness to American Christmas tables. The cake combined chopped dried figs with spices, nuts, and sometimes dates, creating something dense and satisfying. Figs had been Christmas fruit since ancient times, their preservation making them available when fresh fruit was impossible. The cake was often made weeks ahead, wrapped and aged like fruitcake to develop deeper flavor. Buttermilk added tang that balanced the fruit's sweetness, while spices provided warmth appropriate for winter. Families served fig cake with hard sauce or simply dusted with powdered sugar. The texture was almost sticky, requiring small slices that delivered concentrated flavor. Children sometimes resisted the unfamiliar fruit, but grew to love its honeyed sweetness. Fig cake faded, as dried figs became specialty items rather than pantry staples. It was ancient tradition baked into American celebration. Molasses pie with lattice crust gleamed dark and sticky on Christmas sideboards throughout the rural South. The filling was pure molasses thickened with eggs and spiced with ginger and cinnamon, baked until just set beneath decorative pastry strips. The flavor was intense, almost overwhelming to modern palates accustomed to refined sugars. Families served thin slices, the richness demanding restraint. The lattice top allowed steam to escape and created visual beauty against the dark filling. Making proper molasses pie required accepting its strong flavor rather than trying to moderate it. Some added vinegar for balance, others embraced the full molasses intensity. Children often found it too powerful, leaving more for adults who understood its old-fashioned appeal. The pie kept well, the molasses acting as natural preservative. Molasses pie nearly vanished as corn syrup replaced molasses in American pantries. It was sweetness from an earlier era. Raisin pie, spiced for Christmas, filled homes with cinnamon-scented warmth when baked. The filling combined plumped raisins with sugar, spices, and sometimes a splash of vinegar or lemon that brightened the sweetness. The result was something between pie and preserve, intensely flavored and deeply satisfying. Families made raisin pie when fresh fruit was unavailable, the dried grapes providing sweetness through winter months. The spicing varied by region. Some preferred heavy cinnamon, others emphasized nutmeg or cloves. The pie was served warm or at room temperature, often with a dollop of whipped cream. Children loved the concentrated sweetness, while adults appreciated the economical practicality. Making raisin pie required only pantry staples, no expensive ingredients or special equipment. The tradition faded as fruit pies became year-round possibilities. Raisin pie was winter resourcefulness baked into golden crust. Prune whip crowned with cream was Christmas elegance requiring nothing more than stewed fruit and beaten eggs. Cooked prunes were pureed and folded with stiffly beaten egg whites, creating something light yet deeply flavored. The dessert was chilled in stemmed glasses and topped with whipped cream before serving. The contrast between airy purple whip and white cream made beautiful presentation despite humble ingredients. Families served prune whip when something sophisticated was needed without the effort of elaborate baking. The flavor was fruity and subtle, the texture almost mousse-like in its delicacy. Making it required vigorous beating to achieve proper lightness, a skill grandmothers demonstrated through patient example. Children sometimes resisted the prune association, not realizing the elegant dessert contained the fruit they avoided at breakfast. Prune whip disappeared as gelatin desserts replaced egg white foams. It was simplicity transformed into celebration. Prune cake was one of those desserts people loved long before they ever admitted it. A moist, spiced treat that showed up on countless holiday tables thanks to its deep flavor and long shelf life. Grandmothers especially swore by it, calling it their secret weapon because it never dried out and always tasted better the next day. The prunes disappeared into the batter, lending sweetness and moisture without announcing themselves too boldly, and the spices wrapped everything in a warm, comforting aroma. It was a cake that stretched ingredients wisely, perfect for large families and tight budgets. Children would roll their eyes at the thought of prunes, but one bite of that sticky sweet crumb made them believers. It was a dessert born from practicality, the kind of treat that made the most of what people had on hand. But as times changed and holiday desserts became flashier, prune cake was left behind. It did not look glamorous, it did not have fancy toppings, and it did not fit the modern obsession with picture-perfect food. So it vanished, even though anyone who ever loved it can still taste it in their memory, a quiet classic forgotten but never truly gone. Celery and olive relish trays were once the quiet opening act of every Thanksgiving feast. Before the turkey, before the sides, came the cool crunch of celery stuffed with pimento cheese or cream cheese and the briny bite of olives. They offered a balance, freshness, before the richness to come. Housewives prided themselves on arranging them neatly, often on cut glass trays. Children would sneak olives off the plate, pretending not to like them but always coming back for more. It was a simple tradition, but one that marked the beginning of the meal with grace and order. Over time, the relish tray faded, replaced by charcuterie boards and modern appetizers. Yet it remains a symbol of hospitality from a slower, more deliberate age. Celery and olive relish trays were Thanksgiving's crisp, elegant overture. Oatmeal scotchies were the heart of holiday giving. Chewy and golden, they blended oats and butterscotch chips into something simple yet extraordinary. The smell alone could fill a room with warmth, wrapping every corner in sweetness. Each batch came out of the oven soft in the middle, crisp at the edges, perfect in their imperfection. They were the kind of cookie baked with conversation, laughter, and the radio playing in the background. Mothers stacked them in tins lined with wax paper, sending them to friends, teachers, and faraway relatives. They represented kindness more than luxury, care more than presentation. Oatmeal scotchies held a kind of magic that never made it into cookbooks, the magic of togetherness. They were the humble heroes of the 1970s dessert table, proof that the simplest ingredients could carry the most love. One bite, and you could taste home. Maple glazed acorn squash was the kind of side dish that made the kitchen smell like the season itself. The squash was halved, seeds scooped out, and baked until its flesh softened and deepened in color. Then came the glaze. A mix of butter and maple syrup brushed across the top until it shimmered. Back in the oven it went, roasting slowly until the edges caramelized and the centers turned silky. The aroma that filled the air was sweet and woodsy, a hint of maple mixing with the warmth of roasted squash. When pulled from the oven, it gleamed like amber under the light, soft but still holding its shape. Each bite blended savory and sweet, earthy and bright, like a conversation between autumn and winter. It was a dish that needed no decoration, its natural beauty already enough. Served beside roast turkey or ham, it brought balance and warmth to every plate. Maple glazed acorn squash was nature turned into art, simple, wholesome, and full of comfort, meant to be shared with love. Shoofly pie was a slice of Appalachian history wrapped in a layer of sticky molasses and crumb topping, a dessert born from frugality and resourcefulness. It was called Shoofly because the sweet smell drew flies toward the table, and cooks had to shoo them away as the pie cooled. Families made it because molasses was cheaper and easier to store than sugar, making it the perfect holiday ingredient for households that had more hard work than money. The pie baked into a deep, gooey layer at the bottom with a crumbly cake-like topping on top, creating a texture that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved it because it was sweet enough to feel forbidden, and adults enjoyed it because every bite tasted like the land they came from. Over time, as refined sugar became cheap and store-bought pies took over, Shoofly pie disappeared from most homes. It was too regional, too old-fashioned, too simple to compete with newer holiday desserts, but the people who remember it still talk about it with a quiet pride. It was a dessert that told a story, and every slice tasted a little like history. Jello cottage cheese salad was the bright, quirky side dish that defined mid-century optimism. Lime gelatin mixed with cottage cheese, crushed pineapple, and sometimes walnuts or celery. It was a combination that sounded odd but tasted delightfully fresh. The green shimmer made it a cheerful pop on Thanksgiving tables, especially against the browns and golds of the feast. Housewives loved it because it was affordable, reliable, and eye-catching. Served molded or scooped onto lettuce leaves, it represented a time when presentation meant everything. Sweet and savory blended in every bite, the texture light yet satisfying. Though it's vanished from most modern menus, Jello cottage cheese salad still holds a certain charm, a snapshot of when American dining dared to be playful. It was the color of joy on a plate, unashamedly bright and wonderfully nostalgic. Spiced pear bread pudding was the kind of dessert that made old recipes feel new again. It began with cubes of stale bread, soaked in milk and eggs until soft, then baked with slices of canned pears, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The pears melted into the pudding, their syrup seeping through every layer to create sweetness that felt natural and deep. Served warm with a drizzle of cream, it tasted like comfort you could hold. It was a dish that made use of leftovers and turned them into something extraordinary. A 1970s virtue wrapped in flavor. Families made it after holidays when the pantry was full of odds and ends, proving again that thrift could still be beautiful. Each spoonful carried the softness of pear, the spice of memory, and the weight of tradition. Spiced pear pudding was not glamorous, but it had heart. It was the taste of home, gently reborn in every bite. Cranberry-orange congealed salad was color and sparkle on a winter plate. You mixed tart cranberries with orange zest, sugar, and cloves, folding everything into bright red gelatin until it shimmered like stained glass. It chilled in molds shaped like rings, wreaths, or hearts, depending on the occasion. When turned out, it quivered perfectly, cool and festive. Each slice tasted sharp and sweet, a burst of fruit against heavy meats and gravies. The orange gave brightness, the cloves a whisper of spice. It looked fancy, even when made from pantry staples. In the 1950s, it was the pride of the table, a bridge between salad and dessert. Served with whipped cream or plain, it reminded everyone that beauty could be edible. Cranberry-orange congealed salad was nostalgia on a plate, wobbly, bright, and full of cheer. Apple pandowdy was the rustic cousin of all the fancier apple desserts, a dish that did not care about looks or presentation and still managed to win every heart at the table. It began with sliced apples simmered with cinnamon, butter, and a touch of brown sugar until the whole house smelled like the inside of an orchard. Instead of laying a perfect crust over the top, cooks would break pieces of dough and scatter them unevenly, letting the edges sink into the bubbling fruit as it baked. The juices caramelized around the dough, turning each little piece into something crisp, chewy, and irresistible. This was a dessert for families who valued flavor over perfection, people who understood that the best dishes are sometimes the messiest. Children loved it because it felt fun, like a dessert that broke the rules, and adults loved it because it tasted like the orchard harvest served straight from the pan. But as crisps and cobblers became more popular and easier to sell in bakeries, the pandowdy quietly slipped away. Its uneven top was not camera-ready, and its old-fashioned name did not help it survive in a modern world. Still, anyone who ever ate it fresh from the oven remembers the way it tasted like fall itself, a forgotten treasure hiding in plain sight. Sweet potato soufflé was the dish that blurred the line between side and dessert. Mashed sweet potatoes were whipped until airy, blended with butter, eggs, and sugar, then topped with pecans or a crumble of brown sugar. It baked into a golden, fragrant cloud that smelled like comfort itself. This was Southern elegance, a holiday staple that felt indulgent yet familiar. At church potlucks and family dinners, it brought smiles before the first bite. The sweetness paired beautifully with the saltiness of the turkey, making it unforgettable. In many homes, it replaced pie altogether, the star of both dinner and dessert. Over the years, it's been overshadowed by marshmallow-topped versions, but the original soufflé remains unmatched. Sweet potato soufflé was more than food. It was love-baked light, the taste of home dressed up for celebration. Carrot pineapple cake with cream cheese frosting was the wholesome wonder that fooled everyone into thinking dessert could be good for you. Grated carrots gave it color and moisture, while crushed pineapple added natural sweetness. The batter smelled of cinnamon and brown sugar, homey and bright. Baked into golden layers, it was topped with thick cream cheese frosting that struck the perfect balance between tang and sweetness. The combination was magic, soft, spiced, and comforting in every bite. It became a 1970s favorite at potlucks and family holidays alike, bridging the gap between indulgence and nourishment. Walnuts or coconut might join the mix, giving texture and depth. Each slice felt generous, both in flavor and spirit. It was a cake that spoke to the times, practical, full of heart, and always shared. Today, carrot pineapple cake still carries that glow, a dessert that reminds us how kindness can taste like sugar and spice. Baked rice with raisins and cinnamon was comfort dressed in sweetness, a dish born from thrift and transformed by love. The rice simmered slowly in milk and sugar, soaking up every bit of warmth until it turned soft and creamy. Butter melted in last, followed by a handful of golden raisins that plumped in the heat. A dusting of cinnamon crowned it, turning the air rich with spice and memory. Some families baked it until the top browned slightly, others served it straight from the pot, steaming and fragrant. Each spoonful carried both sweetness and substance, a perfect bridge between side and dessert. The raisins added brightness, the cinnamon gave warmth, and together they turned humble rice into something celebratory. It was a dish found in immigrant homes across America, bringing together old traditions and new beginnings. Served warm beside roasts or cool the next morning with milk, it never lost its quiet charm. Baked rice with raisins and cinnamon was a recipe of heart and heritage, simple, tender, and timeless. Cranberry pudding with hard sauce was one of those desserts that looked humble on the outside but carried a surprising punch once you cut into it. This steamed pudding was dense, tart, and beautifully old-fashioned, the kind of dish families made before ovens were common in every home. The cranberries gave it a deep ruby color and a sharpness that cut through the heaviness of a Thanksgiving meal, and it always arrived at the table warm enough to fog up the windows. But the real magic came from the hard sauce, a thick mixture of butter, sugar, and a touch of something strong enough to make everyone at the table raise their eyebrows just a bit. When you dolloped it over the pudding, it melted slowly, seeping into every corner and creating a flavor no modern dessert can truly imitate. Families made this because it felt festive, grown-up, and cozy all at once, a dessert that lit up the room even without frosting or decorations. Over time, the steaming process fell out of fashion, and people traded long cooking times for convenience. Microwaves replaced kettles, boxed mixes replaced handwritten recipes, and the pudding slipped quietly into obscurity. But the truth is, a dessert like this was never about convenience. It was about gathering in the kitchen, checking the pot, waiting together, and finally sharing something warm and indulgent on a cold holiday night, a forgotten classic, but one with a heart that has never really disappeared. Carrot and raisin salad was sunshine in a bowl, bright, wholesome, and bursting with cheer. It appeared on mid-century Thanksgiving tables like a welcome breath of freshness among casseroles and gravies. Shredded carrots gleamed orange and crisp, their sweetness amplified by plump raisins and a creamy dressing made from mayonnaise, sugar, and sometimes lemon juice. The mix was simple but magical, its sweetness balancing the savory dishes around it. Housewives cherished it for its ease. No cooking, no fuss, just a quick toss and chill. It represented a time when beauty and thrift walked hand in hand, when even the humblest ingredients could create color and joy. Some families added pineapple or coconut for extra brightness, others kept it plain, just as their mothers did. Served in glass bowls or on lettuce leaves, it caught the light like edible sunshine. Children loved it most, eating it between bites of turkey and mashed potatoes, smiling at its sweetness. Over the years, as salads turned green and health trends changed, this cheerful orange classic slipped quietly away. But to those who remember, its taste is pure nostalgia. Afternoons filled with laughter, linoleum floors warm under bare feet, and family gathered close. Carrot and raisin salad wasn't just food, it was happiness served cold. Mince pie was the grand finale of old-fashioned Thanksgivings. Filled with dried fruits, spices, and sometimes sweet or meat, it was rich, dark, and deeply aromatic. Its scent alone could fill a home with warmth and expectation. This pie told stories of early settlers who stretched what they had into something celebratory. The filling was simmered slowly, seasoned with nutmeg, cinnamon, and clove, flavors that tasted like history itself. Mince pie wasn't light or fleeting. It was meant to be savored, slice by slice. For generations, it sat proudly beside pumpkin and apple pies, holding its own as the taste of tradition. Today, it's nearly vanished from holiday tables, replaced by easier, milder desserts. But for those who remember, mince pie was more than food. It was the taste of gratitude, memory, and time well kept. Molasses crinkle cookies were the scent of the season itself. Rolled in sugar before baking, they puffed and cracked into golden brown circles that sparkled like frost. The air filled with the smell of ginger, cinnamon, and dark molasses, cozy and deep. Each bite was chewy at the center, crisp at the edge, a perfect balance of texture and spice. They were simple to make, yet they carried the spirit of tradition. Families baked them in big batches, stacking them high in tins for neighbors and friends. The cracked tops looked like tiny maps of sweetness, proof that imperfection could still be beautiful. When warm, they almost tasted like gingerbread kissed by caramel. The cookies cooled on racks beside cups of cocoa, each one inviting another bite. In a decade obsessed with innovation, Molasses crinkles held fast to the old ways. Sturdy, fragrant, and made to last. They were the kind of cookie that turned every kitchen into a story. By the mid-20th century, rich, layered confections took center stage, and nothing captured the spirit of romance quite like the combination of chocolate and raspberries. It wasn't just personal preference. There was science behind it. Chocolate contains compounds that stimulate endorphins, while raspberries add a tart contrast that enhances sweetness without overwhelming the palate. For decades, layered mousse parfaits were a restaurant-style showstopper. The contrast of smooth, airy chocolate and vibrant raspberry compote made for a dessert that was as balanced as it was beautiful. But despite its popularity in mid-century cookbooks and fine dining menus, this elegant treat slowly faded from homemade Valentine's traditions. What happened was that convenience won. As boxed cake mixes and pre-made puddings became household staples, the labor-intensive nature of mousse lost its appeal. Making a proper chocolate mousse requires precise tempering and careful folding, skills that don't come with a microwave shortcut. Maybe it's time to bring back the romance of a carefully crafted bite. No instant pudding required. Chess pie was once the steady savior of holiday meals, a dessert every Southern household kept on hand because it never let anyone down. Made from sugar, butter, eggs, and a splash of vinegar or lemon, it baked into a dense golden filling with a soft crackle on top. Families turned to it when times were thin, knowing they could make something sweet from ingredients already in the pantry. Its flavor was warm, rich, and comforting, with a tang that made each bite feel special. For many, chess pie tasted like childhood and crowded dinner tables during cold nights. But as Thanksgiving desserts grew flashier and more elaborate, this simple pie slipped to the background. People chose taller pies, fancier toppings, and long ingredient lists. Yet anyone who has eaten chess pie warm from the oven knows its honesty is what makes it timeless. Giblet gravy was once the soul of Thanksgiving, thick, savory, and rich with history. It was made from the neck, heart, and liver of the turkey, simmered down with flour, broth, and patience. Its deep flavor came from care, not cost. Grandmothers knew how to make it smooth and golden, pouring it over mashed potatoes, stuffing, and even turkey slices. Every ladle carried the effort of the cook and the essence of the meal itself. It took time, chopping, simmering, stirring, but it was worth every minute. Giblet gravy wasn't just sauce, it was a lesson in thrift and tradition. Nowadays, many reach for instant mixes or skip it entirely, losing the heart of the feast. But those who remember can still taste its richness, the warmth that tied every dish together. Giblet gravy was Thanksgiving's quiet masterpiece, the glue that bound the meal and the memories. Candy cane fudge bars brought holiday sparkle to every table. Chocolate fudge, soft and glossy, was spread thick in pans before being topped with crushed peppermint sticks. The colors, deep brown and bright red, looked like Christmas captured in candy. Each bite was a dance of cool mint and rich cocoa, bold yet balanced. Children helped press the candies on top, their fingers sticky with chocolate and joy. Mothers wrapped pieces in wax paper and tucked them into tins bound for neighbors and friends. The bars snapped cleanly, each one shining with little shards of peppermint glass. They were a gift that spoke of cheer and warmth without needing a card. In an era when everything was homemade and heart-driven, candy cane fudge bars stood out as both festive and effortless. They brought smiles to faces and sweetness to cold winter nights. One bite and the holidays felt close again. Simple, sincere, and sparkling. Savory bread pudding with sausage was what home smelled like in December. Cubes of stale bread soaked in milk, eggs, and stock until they turned soft as clouds. Sausage browned in a skillet, its fat mixing with onions, celery, and pepper before joining the pudding dish. Baked until the edges turned crisp and the center stayed custardy, it came out golden and steaming. The first spoonful tasted like warmth itself, salty, rich, and comforting. In the 1940s, this dish sat proudly beside roasts, feeding big families with little waste. It filled bellies and hearts alike, stretching ingredients farther than they should have gone. Leftovers, if there were any, tasted even better reheated the next day. Savory bread pudding with sausage was proof that thrift and flavor could live side by side in perfect harmony. Orange slice cake was a holiday surprise wrapped inside a dessert, dense and chewy with bursts of candied orange that lit up every bite. People loved making it because it felt playful, different from the usual pies and puddings. The chopped orange candy slices melted slightly in the oven, blending with nuts, coconut, and a rich batter to create a texture unlike anything else on the table. Children always recognized the taste immediately, since those little orange candies were a rare treat any other time of year. Families baked this cake weeks in advance because the flavor deepened as it sat, becoming richer and more complex with every passing day. It was the kind of dessert that made people smile before they even tasted it. But as candy companies changed their recipes and holiday traditions shifted towards simpler desserts, orange slice cake faded away. It was too old-fashioned, too sweet, too heavy for modern tastes, and eventually it disappeared from cookbooks and memories alike. Still, for anyone who grew up eating it, the flavor remains unforgettable. A cheerful dessert from a different time. Oyster dressing was the pride of many coastal Southern Thanksgiving tables, a dish that brought the sea to the holiday feast. Cornbread was crumbled and mixed with celery, onions, butter, and oysters fresh from the Gulf or local markets. The briny flavor blended beautifully with the sweetness of the cornbread, creating something both humble and rich. It was baked until golden, the edges crisp and the inside soft and moist. Families who lived near the coast saw it as a taste of home, something that connected them to both land and water. Oyster dressing was never about luxury. It was about tradition, a dish passed down through grandmother's hands and worn recipe cards. As refrigeration and taste trends changed, oysters became rarer on Thanksgiving menus. But for those who remember, the scent of that bubbling pan still means celebration. Oyster dressing was Thanksgiving's coastal heart, where resourcefulness met heritage. Molasses pecan pie was the Deep South's answer to richness with soul, a dessert that carried history in every dark, sticky bite. Instead of corn syrup, it relied on molasses, giving the pie a flavor that was smoky, bittersweet, and deeply rooted in the soil that grew both its sugarcane and its pecans. Each slice shimmered beneath candlelight, its filling thick and glossy, its scent a mix of toasted nuts, caramel, and earth. The crust, flaky and browned, framed the dense, syrupy middle like a work of art. This wasn't just a sweet treat. It was a story of frugality and flavor intertwined, of cooks who understood that depth mattered more than excess. Families adapted their recipes from one generation to the next, each adding a personal touch, more molasses for bite, more butter for silk, more pecans for pride. Served warm with a dollop of whipped cream, it felt like the world had slowed down for a moment of indulgence. Molasses pecan pie embodied Southern resilience, blending hardship and abundance into one perfect harmony. Today, its dark richness is rarely seen on modern tables, replaced by lighter, easier desserts. But those who tasted it know it wasn't just dessert, it was devotion made edible. Date nut roll was the kind of dessert that made children hover anxiously around the kitchen, waiting for the moment it was sliced. It was not a pie or a cake, but a refrigerator candy, rolled by hand and packed with sweet dates, nuts, and just enough cookie crumbs to hold everything together. Families made it weeks before the holiday, storing it away in wax paper like treasure hidden in the back of the fridge. When you sliced it, the spirals of sticky fruit and crunchy nuts made every piece look like a tiny stained glass window, and the taste was just as memorable. It was sweet without being overwhelming, rich without being heavy, and easy to stretch for a crowd when money was tight. Making it was a labor of love, requiring time and patience that people no longer make space for. As store-bought candy boxes and pre-made sweets filled the shelves, the roll faded away, seen as too old-fashioned or too fiddly for modern kitchens, but back then it symbolized celebration, care, and the quiet excitement of a holiday dessert pulled from a cold shelf on a chilly evening. A little forgotten, maybe, but never undeserving of its place at the table. Baked apples with currants were winter's simplest form of sweetness, a dish that turned cold nights into comfort. The apples were cored carefully, hollowed out just enough to hold a spoonful of brown sugar, a pat of butter, and a handful of dried currants. Once placed in the oven, they softened slowly, their skins splitting slightly, the insides melting into syrup. The smell filled the house with spice and caramel, warm and familiar as a wool blanket. When they came out, the syrup pooled at the bottom of the pan, golden and glossy. A spoonful broke the tender skin and revealed the soft, fragrant fruit beneath. It was dessert before dessert, light but full of flavor, rich but never heavy. Families served it plain or with cream, letting its quiet charm speak for itself. The Victorians made it for elegance, Depression-era cooks made it for survival. Yet, no matter the time or reason, it brought the same peace to the table. Baked apples with currants were humble generosity, the kind of dish that asked for little and gave everything. Which forgotten Christmas dessert would you bring back to your holiday table? Share your memories in the comments, hit like if this took you back, and subscribe for more lost recipes worth remembering.